today's Token Economics. My name is Mikael Bondum, and today with me I have Christopher Portmann. Hello, Christopher.
Hi, my pleasure to be here.
Great to have you with us today on a connection here, and I'm looking forward to get to talk today about the token economics and all the changes we've been doing. I think if we can start with you, Christopher, and maybe just an overview. Could you try to tell us, just as a good intro, how does the token economics of Concordium work, and what are the different variables that we're going to talk about today?
Yes, so I put a brief flow chart of how the tokenomics work on the screen. So there are two sources of rewards that are distributed to validators and delegators. They are the transaction fees, which come from the users. So these are in the bottom left of the screen. The user accounts, when they do transactions, have to pay a fee. And then there's the minted CCD, which gets minted once a day. A little bit of CCD is minted. And this also gets distributed. So from these, this minted CCD is in this diamond in the top left. So from these two sources, the foundation takes a small percentage, which is then used for further funding the chain. And the rest goes to validators and delegators. So you can think of it as having two big pools. All the rewards coming from the minted CCD are distributed for producing blocks, and all the rewards for all the transaction fees are also distributed to the validators. So once we have all these rewards, every day we give part of it to the passive delegators. So these passive delegators essentially get rewards as if they had delegated a little bit to every single pool. So they get a percentage corresponding to how much they've actually staked. And the rest then is distributed to the pools. Each time a pool bakes a block, at the end of the day, they'll get all their rewards for the number of blocks they've done, and they get all the transaction fees from the transactions that were in the blocks they've baked. And then the pool rewards are then distributed to the validators, to the validator of the pool, and then to the delegators in the pool. So we are going to talk a little bit about this and which of these parameters changed and why.
Great. That sounds good.
Yes, so Mikael, we have recently changed the so-called leverage bound and how the delegation commissions are set. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I would love to do so. So the leverage bound is the ratio between total pool stake and the validator stake, and we've changed that from 3 to 6, which basically means that before you could maximum take in 3 times as much delegation as the total stake of your pool, which put a upper bound to the total amount that a validator could stake. We have increased this, and the reason for us to increase it is because there's a lot of staking businesses that operate as non-custodial staking providers, which means they have nothing to do with their client and customer funds, and hence they are quickly going to reach a natural stop for where there's not enough on the validator itself. There's not enough tokens available to attract new delegations because it simply goes too fast. And the only way these type of businesses can increase their total business on a particular blockchain such as Concordium is by either changing their business structure to be more of either a custodial business or something else. And hence, by going from 3 to 6, we give them the opportunity to grow twice as much without having to put up the collateral themselves. This is, of course, a thing that weakens security a bit, but it's done so with a full a full understanding of the implications of this. And it's hopefully going to lead to more non-custodial staking service providers joining the Concordium blockchain. And by doing so, they will actually, in an overall way, increase the blockchain security in the long run. And by this, we also give opportunities for holders of the token to have more pools to choose from by increasing the amount of professional staking service providers running Concordium staking pools. Another Another change we've been doing is to increase the passive commission from 12 to 25%, which in its simplest form is gonna disincentivize people from using the passive delegation pool. This is also a variable and a factor that on a broader scheme will contribute to increasing and enhancing the conditions in an overall way for non-custodial staking service providers to operate on Concordium. We hope that by making these two changes, we can expand the amount of pools on the network. I think the last change is probably, for this particular set, is probably the most important one. It's letting the validator choose the pool commission by itself. Today it is set at 10%, which means that 10% of the rewards earned by the delegator is being paid to the validator as in commission. Now we will change this so each validator can set its fee depending on how it wants to set the fee. Could be everything from 0% to 100%. This will give the staking businesses the opportunity to compete versus one another, to either increase the fee and provide add-on services, or to decrease the fee and compete on price, basically making this a more open market. The leverage bound increase, the passive commission increase, and the setting the pool commissions free are hopefully going to lead to an overall strengthening the overall Concordium ecosystem, especially when it comes to staking service providers. The more staking service providers that the blockchain will have, the more options the token holder will have, and the more decentralized decision-making, block creation, block attestation will be, and that will strengthen the overall ecosystem. So these are the changes that will hopefully lead to a better staking ecosystem overall. Yes, I think that was on this particular set of the token economics change. We already covered this in one of the token economics drop, but there's yeah. Let me go to the next one. Sorry, Christopher.
Yeah. Next one is to talk about the difference between the our validators, how they used to be bakers and finalizers, and how that has changed. So we changed our consensus protocol a few months ago. Maybe most people are already aware of that. We used to run a protocol. In fact, we used to run two protocols in parallel. There was a protocol for creating blocks, and our so-called bakers did that. They made block after block and added them to the chain. And there's another protocol running in parallel for finalizing these blocks. Because at the time when this consensus protocol came out, what most chains did was just use the longest chain rule, which is very unsatisfactory because you have to wait for a chain to get very long, and then a block is only finalized when it's like far back in the chain, and even then it's never finalized with probability 100%. So what we did is run this finalization protocol in parallel that could mark blocks as final. We changed to a new protocol, a BFT protocol. This one is significantly faster. We produce significantly more blocks. So that was one of the main motivations for the changes. And a kind of side effect of this is that we don't have two protocols running in parallel anymore. We just have one protocol. Because what happens in a BFT protocol is that the validators, when they see a new block, they check it. If it's good, they tell everyone, hey, this block is good. And if enough people think that the block is good, it gets certified. And if two consecutive blocks get certified, the first is final. So we don't need a protocol in parallel which finalizes blocks. It just kind of happens as a side effect of the BFT protocol. So we adapted the tokenomics to that. And the first thing we did was remove our category of finalizers. We don't have people running a special finalization protocol in parallel anymore. So now that the finalizers are gone, bakers, we're renaming them to validators. That is a term used in many other blockchains, and hopefully it'll allow our tokenomics and our system to be more familiar to people that come from the outside. Now these validators, they're still going to get the same amount of rewards as before, because the ones that were finalizers get the same amount of rewards as before, because the finalizer rewards are now just being distributed as rewards for producing blocks. And the people who didn't have enough stake to be finalizers before, now they're going to get the same rewards as anyone else, since we don't reward finalizing anymore. Everyone just gets the all the minted CCD that is allocated to validators. I guess that was it about the name changes and why we have validators. Mikael, can you tell us now about the mint rate, how we change it and what the long-term goals are?
Yes, I can do so. Mint rate has obviously been one of the most interesting topics regarding token economics. I think it takes a lot of focus and attention, and obviously so. It's a huge impact on the overall token economics of Concordium. And I think that I just want to start a different place with the mint rate to say that when Concordium was founded and when the token economics were kind of designed, the overall long-term plan was to go towards 2% at some point. This was linked to transactions per second. So the more transactions that were going through the blockchain, the more transaction fees were accrued, and hence you could justify paying validators less for security, and thereby decreasing the mint rate. So if we look at why do we even have a mint rate? It's because we have a set of validators, and this set of validators are performing a job for the blockchain, and they're performing a security job. They are proposing and testing blocks, and to do this job, they need to earn money. And the money can be earned from two sources. One is the transaction fees, and the other one is the mint rate. And the mint rate is kind of a way to make sure that if the transaction fees are not high enough to pay for the security, we add the mint rate, and the two combined gives enough payment for the validators to be motivated to act as guarantees of security of the network. With the increase of transaction fees, you could decrease the mint rate and thereby reaching a long-term state of a 2% mint rate, where the majority of the security budget, so to speak, is being paid by the transaction fees. What then has changed since this design is that the expectation of first of all, for all the reasons you just mentioned before, Christopher, the improvement of the blockchain's throughput have meant that transaction fees have gone down or will go down, and the throughput of the blockchain will be substantially higher than it is today. So there is and furthermore, we have had a really high degree of staked tokens and a really high security budget. And this really high security budget has led to a super secure chain, and perhaps at a cost that have been a little bit too high. And therefore, by decreasing 10% to 8% on the mint rate, we are also decreasing the security budget that validators and staking operators and token holders who delegate will get to participate in the staking protocol. And this is, of course, not something that we can rush. We cannot rush from 10% to 2%. This will impact the microeconomics of each participant too much, or at least we don't know we can't foresee the potential consequences of that. So this is still the long-term goal of reaching 2%, but it has to be done gradually. It has to be done with the oversight of what happens then on the blockchain. How often will each participant and each different type of economic actor, how will they behave differently, if they will behave differently? So by doing a change from 10 to 8%, we are trying to push in that direction, try to unlink it from the TPS, acknowledging that we cannot have a 10% mint rate year on year for too many years before we will simply have too many tokens flooding the market. So we need to decrease how often we put in new tokens in the market. But we have to do it very carefully, very thoughtfully, and still maintaining a a super secure blockchain as we have today, because in the end we are running in the end the Concordium is a decentralized blockchain. The backing of such a blockchain is the security that underpins it, and if people and organizations and businesses and individuals stop staking, it will decrease security, and we want to avoid that. I know there will also be some questions on the mint rate specifically, but I think it's really important to have in the back of our minds, not just for us, but also for the governance committee, that we cannot do changes to the mint rate rushed and fast. They have to be done slow and thoughtfully, and by keeping by continuously observing what's going on in the blockchain, how does this affect behavior of the economic participants, and then it will lead to new decisions on mint rate in the future. I think that sums up the thoughts around the mint rate. Do you have anything to add to this, Christopher?
No, I thought you covered everything.
Okay, that's good. I know we will have further questions on the mint rate later, so we can save the elaborations for later then. On jumping a topic a little bit, I will go to another of the large changes we've made here in the tokenomics redesign, which is around the security. Can you tell us, Christopher, about the security of the chain and how other parameters are going to affect that, other changes we've done?
Yes, so security is a very generic term. It's a combination of many things. We have a notion of liveness, which means the chain should continue running. Notion of safety, which means that someone can't spend their CCDs twice, or that you won't end up with a fork in the chain, where we have the blocks finalized on both branches of the fork. Decentralization is also an important factor in security. I mean, the whole point of a blockchain is to have for the power to be decentralized. If we don't have that, arguably security falls apart. So when it comes to a BFT protocol, one important thing you have is a security proof. It's a mathematical proof that as long as 2/3 of the participants are actually running the correct protocol and are able to do so, like they have their computers up and running and they can send messages and they aren't victim of some denial of service attack or something like that, 2/3 of the validators by stake, 2/3 of the stake is running the protocol correctly, it is not possible to stop the chain. Liveness, we will have liveness, and it's not possible to double spend CCD, we have safety. So that's kind of the basic guarantee we have. But then on top of that, we need to provide incentives for people to try and behave honestly. And also, if there is an attack on the chain, it tends to slow things down. Even if they cannot break liveness or safety, they're just going to mess with the chain and slow things down, even if they can't stop it. So we want to add measures that can then prevent that. So one of the first measures we've done is to reduce the pool size from the maximum pool size from 10% to 5%. So this is 10 and 5% of the staked CCD staked in pools. So this will increase the number of pools. We have several pools that are going to have to split up into more pools. This increases the decentralization. Decentralization in terms of the network. We'll have more nodes. Of course, the CCD owners won't have changed. They'll just have to run more nodes. So you have more nodes running, and an attack that has to try to take nodes down, they'll have to take more nodes down before they can stop the network. So this just increases decentralization. So that's the first measure. Michael mentioned the leverage bound. I'm putting it here. It was, as Michael explained, we increased the leverage bound to allow non-custodial staking service providers to run a business on the chain. This actually weakens security. Now, it doesn't weaken it by a lot. It weakens it because we consider it is easier to get delegation than to buy stake. Because if you're running everything with your own stake, it's going to cost you a lot of money if you want to mount an attack. If you can maybe get delegation at a lower cost. But still, it is quite costly to get delegation. It is not something easy to do. So it's still hard to get enough stake to perform an attack. So even though this weakens security, we consider the effect to be minimal. Other measures we have done in the bottom square in the middle, 2 more measures. The minimum stake to be a validator has gone up from 14,000 CCD to 500,000 CCD. One of the main motivations for that is just simply looking at the the validators out there, we realized that if you I looked at this some months ago, we took the tail end of the validators, took the last 20, I think 17 of them were not running. But they were still there and their stake was still part of the protocol. And this has to do with the fact that at the current price of CCD, it costs you less than 100 euros to get your 14K CCD. And then people could just, stake the CCD without even understanding what they're doing, without even running a node. And it would just slow down the protocol each time these validators don't get selected. So the initial plan was that to be a validator, it requires several thousand CCD and not just several thousand euros and not just like less than 100. So we've adapted the minimum threshold to 500,000 CCD. And parallel to that, we want to introduce measures to remove inactive validators. So this will take time. It'll require a protocol update, which hasn't been done yet. It will be done at some point in 2024. But then validators that just aren't running anymore will be able to remove them. Because at the moment, there is no option for removing a validator. They can only remove themselves. And these effects should increase liveness, should prevent the protocol from slowing down in just because of faulty validators. And the last two changes we're making are to increase safety. The cooldown for delegators, once delegators want to unstake, up to now it was 2 weeks, we're changing that to 3 weeks, and we're lining it up with the cooldown for validators. And the reason for having the same cooldown for both is simply because we realized that validators can delegate to themselves and thus can go around the cooldown. It seemed a bit pointless to have different values. And of course, having just one value for the same just simplifies the whole tokenomics, makes it easier to understand. So everyone has the same cooldown right now. And this is paired with a change where the stake in cooldown will not be effective anymore. That means it will not count towards the stake of the node of the pool, and therefore the person unstaking will not get rewards while it is in cooldown. That second change again requires a protocol update. Has not been implemented yet. Should come in 2024 at some point. All other changes, which are just a change of parameter, cooldown from 2 to 3 weeks, minimum equity from 14K to 500K, all that will be done with a parameter change, which will be a transaction. It has already been submitted to the chain and it'll go live on December 7th. So this, back to the staking cooldown, which will not be effective. The main reason for doing this, well, we want to align with security standards in the blockchains. This is the standard way of doing it. And the reason is simply if someone unstakes, we do not want them to be able to perform an attack, just before they get the CCDs back in their wallet. Like time the attack so it is just before it goes back in the wallet. That is not possible anymore because now the CCD, which is unstaked, will not be effective when it's in cooldown. I think that covers, unless you have something to add on the security, Mikael.
No, I think
that covers all the changes.
Yeah, I know. I think you went very thoroughly through all the different points that we had. What do you think in overall, all these changes, are they overall enhancing the security aspect, or should we view each of these aspects differently? How does decentralization affect security, or is there even a link here? Or how would you, if you had to sum up all the changes in terms of that, how should we view that from the outside?
Well, the goal was a net increase in security. I guess only the future will tell us. But the goal was really enhancing security along with making a better environment for staking service providers and for delegators. But all in all, I think every change just increases the whole robustness of our tokenomics.
Okay, I think one of the key challenges we've had during this whole redesign is that a lot of things are strengthened commercialization of the blockchain, but also not providing more security to the blockchain. So we've tried to figure out all the different elements that we can change, which can do both. And maybe it doesn't do both by a lot, but I think by you saying that we have a net positive on the security, I can also say from my point of view, I think we have a net positive on the commercialization with regards to token economic design. And I think to try to balance the two and to achieve that is an important framework. I think we have to continue to view these parameters, see how they affect, how are they going to affect behavior, and if we can further do things within token economics that can both be a net positive on the security and on the commercialization side of the blockchain. But I think we have achieved that from what you're saying here on the security aspects.
Mm-hmm.
So we should maybe move to next topic, or what do you think?
Yes. So the things which haven't been changed. One thing which hasn't been done is let's just go jump right into it. We haven't burnt any CCDs.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that, Mikael?
Yeah, sure. I think now I just got to speak about all the good stuff we've done here on the security and commercialization, and I think it's important to acknowledge that throughout these token economic changes, we were very much, Christopher and I were very much in also with respect to the community to say, hey, there's nothing here that are going to not be addressed. So we have looked at everything that we think is token economics related, and some things we thought this is not a good trade-off in terms of what we want to achieve. And other things have been good trade-offs, which are many of the things that you mentioned here, Christopher. And one particular thing that has been brought up many times is the burn or token burn. Token burn could be done at multiple levels. These particular questions that have been, can we do token burn on the blockchain level, or should we do it on the foundation level? I think this is two different things. The Concordium Foundation is... Yeah, sorry. Good. Let's put the slide up. Great. I think there's a difference between the network design and the financial policy of the foundation. And the foundation has an obligation to spend its resources and finances in promoting the blockchain ecosystem the best possible way. So burning tokens from the foundation side does not really change anything. Yes, it might reduce the total supply, but this is an amount of a supply that is not in the open market anyway. The foundation does not trade or use its token in a way that is affecting the overall ecosystem negatively. So any potential token burn that the foundation might do, I can't see how this is going to create some sort of economic... it's hard for me to see how this is going to do anything positively other than reducing a supply number at a pool of tokens that anyway are not gonna meet the market, at least not anytime soon. So that's why I want to exclude that part. We can talk about the part, and if we get questions on the financial policy of the foundation, I'd love to elaborate on it. But from a token design point of view, it doesn't really make sense to talk about a token burn at the foundation. We can talk about a token burn on the blockchain design, because that is a valuable and thing to talk about. It is a parameter that is important, and we can compare it to a shareholder buyback. If a company uses its proceeds to buy back shares, there's less shares in the market, and hence the price of each share must go up. And I think this is the dynamic that people are referring to when they want to have a token burn. But we have to keep in mind that we are already having a mint rate which is increasing the total supply, and the mint rate to increase the total supply is because we want to pay for security of this blockchain. So if we are to decrease the amount of tokens in circulation, we have to first do it through the mint rate, because this is where we are kind of adding a layer of tokens to provide a security budget robust enough to meet the market the way it is today. This is, of course, there's no one particular level where you can say, now we have enough security. It's always a matter of policy, how secure do we want a blockchain to be. I think it's one of the pinnacles of Concordium. It's one of the most important things that we have a really secure layer 1 blockchain. Christopher went over the amount of tokens required to perform an attack. We want to keep that level extremely high so that businesses that interact on the Concordium network feel secure and safe that this blockchain is going to run just as we promised. And this is going to cost on tokens, and that's why we have a mint rate. And that's why it does not really make sense where we are today to do a token burn on the blockchain design. Because if I don't know if I'm going in a ring here, Christopher, but I think this is the reasoning why I don't think it's the right time or place for Concordium to introduce a token burn as it is today. For those who then want to know when could we have a token burn, you could connect it to transaction fees in the future. Let's put up a hypothetical scenario that the amount of transaction fees becomes so high on this blockchain that too many people are going to stake. The mint rate is going to be at 0% because there's no reason to introduce new tokens to the market. And the amount of transaction fees there's simply more transaction fees than there is a necessity to pay for security through the staking services that operates in the blockchain. If that is the case, then it means we have a surplus of security budget, and then it could be an idea to connect it to transaction fees in the future and to say, okay, part of the transaction fees are being burned, part of it is going to pay for the security budget. And this way, the Concordium blockchain will reach a point where it's constantly shrinking its total supply. So that's a potential connection in the future, but it requires a completely different set of participants than we have today, and a different way of how the transaction fees are being paid from users to staking service providers through the security. Yeah, I think this is the thoughts regarding. I think everybody who thinks about token burn or about mint rate has to see it in a connection to security budget for operating a decentralized blockchain. I think that's what I had to say about token burn as one of the important topics of today.
I thought that was good. I won't add anything.
Good. I'm happy to hear. To go through the last important, or maybe not the last, but at least one of another important topic of token economics that we haven't addressed yet is the transaction fees. What can you tell us about those, Christopher?
So transaction fees, we are currently still looking at them. Initially, we had planned to have a revision of the transaction fees for this tokenomics update, but it turned out to be more complex than we thought, requiring more time, more analysis, and we didn't want to delay the whole tokenomics because this was held back. So we decided to roll out everything except this. So this is still in the works. So just to give you a brief idea, transaction fees are a combination of many different things. When I submit a transaction to the chain, I'm going to be requiring the validators to store data. I'm going to be requiring them to perform some computation. And there may be other particularly complex things which happen, like smart contracts calling smart contracts, which add extra security issues and extra complications. So all of these different things validators need to do are priced. This is the price of storing data. This is the price of executing an operation, etc. And then the transaction, the price that you pay for a transaction will just be the sum of all the different elements composing the transaction. So right now we are just reviewing the whole thing. Have we priced it properly? Are we pricing properly the storage of data? Are we pricing properly the time it takes to execute data? Can we improve our engine so that we execute things faster and then it'll cost less to the user? Have we exaggerated the cost of these complexity premiums, like the recursive smart contract calls, etc.? So we're really looking at every single element there and analyzing every single one. Can we reduce the cost here? Have we priced it correctly? Can we improve the techniques or the code in order to reduce the cost for the end user. So that's one thing we're doing. And on the other side is the commercial view. How does this compare to other chains? Now, that one is always difficult because other chains usually price their transactions in a volatile currency. So most currencies are now like 20 times less than they were a year and a half ago. So now the prices have gone down by 20. Whereas on Concordium, one of our strengths is that it's very stable. You set up your business on Concordium, you know what you're going to pay because the price for transactions is fixed in euros. But it also makes comparison to other chains very difficult because the prices on other chains keep changing. But we are still doing the best we can, comparing to other chains, trying to figure out, are we competitive? And all that is still in the works. So there will be a change. I'm pretty confident of that, and it's going to be a reduction. Transaction fees are not going to go up on Concordium, they're only going to go down. And we expect a reduction in 2024. But now exactly what will reduce, only complex transactions, all transactions, it is still in the works. So I unfortunately can't tell you more right now because I don't have the answers yet.
So could we also say, I think it's great to hear that we are going to see a transaction fee reduction in 2024. You could say a reduction in the transaction fees are going to help businesses have lesser cost transacting on the blockchain, but it also means that validators will earn less from transaction fees when proposing and testing blocks, which means that a topic such as a token burn on the blockchain level is even further away. And this is not a bad thing, it's actually a good thing, because lower transaction fees leads to more demand to use Concordium as a blockchain. I think we have to see it in connection with that. I just think it's important to tie these things together, because we cannot have a super high transactions, then a token burn, but then we need to have the businesses paying to have such a high transaction fees, and that's not the way it's going to go around. I think what you're saying here is a positive outlook.
Reduction in transaction fees also means less CCD going to the foundation, which means all the more important for the foundation to sit on the CCD they have for when they need to sponsor projects on the chain or whatever else they do with their CCD.
That's also a valid point. Thanks for including that. Okay, I think this has covered the main topics that we had in the tokenomics design. We also covered two of the larger things that we didn't touch yet, which is the token burn and the transaction fees. What do you say, Christopher? Should we move to some of the questions that we received during these ongoing changes and prior to the event?
Yes, that would be great. I would love to do that.
Okay, then let me start out with the first one, which is we got a question here which reads out loud here. Why wasn't there a vote about the new token economics?
Right, so I'm going to assume that this means why didn't all token holders vote? I'm going to interpret the question like that. And well, I'd have loved to have all the token holders vote. Decentralization is something on our roadmap, and in the future we want token holders to vote on all these key things. We are simply not there yet. It is extremely complicated from a legal point of view. Many DAOs have gotten in trouble with authorities because they didn't do things the way authorities wanted them to do it, and we certainly don't want to make a mistake like that. It is complicated from a technical point of view. We want to set up the tools to do it properly. So this is something on our roadmap. Decentralization is something important. It's in the white paper. We have steps to decentralization, and we will get there as soon as we can. The first step to decentralization will be electing the governance committee, the new members to the governance committee, which should happen next summer. So at the moment, the way things are done is the governance committee get to decide this. So technically there was a vote that the governance committee did vote on what the tokenomics changes should be. And this governance committee will be expanded to 7 people, 2 people from the community next year, and they will continue voting on things until we are at the point where we can ask the community to actually vote on things. So we have a detailed roadmap of what we expect to do for decentralization in the white paper. This question came in 2 parts. The second part was, I'll leave this one to you, Mikael. Why were only a handful of businesses asked for their opinion?
Yes, I think this ties back to one of the questions I had during the AMA, which is, did we ask any of the ecosystem participants on these topics? And the answer to this is yes, we did. But I also think that we need to, I mean, the premise of the question needs to be clarified a little bit. We didn't ask the businesses of their opinions of should we do X, or should we do Y, should we do Z. I think what we wanted to understand, and I also think this ties into the very first topic that we covered today, which was regarding the non-custodial staking service providers. It is no secret that Concordium has some really strong custodial staking service providers offering custody and trading and staking for Concordium. This is really great, really good for the ecosystem, really good for the project, good for the blockchain. If we compare this to how the blockchain ecosystem is in general, like in the industry, I think 90% or 95% of the staking businesses are non-custodial staking businesses. This makes it easy to interact across different geographical jurisdictions. And we want to incentivize more of this type of business to interact on Concordium. So we didn't ask them for, should we change the mint rate from 10 to 8%? That was not the question. It was more a question of, here are some variables, here are some of the parameters that we have under token economics. If we change these parameters, how does this affect the way you run your business? We want to understand how they run their businesses today, how it affects the future operations of the business. And for those businesses that are not part of the Concordium ecosystem today, why are you not part of the ecosystem? What is limiting you from operating your staking service on the Concordium blockchain? I think these are the questions we asked in order to understand their businesses and the business behavior depending on the token economics variables. So there will be many of these businesses that we so-called ask for their opinions that would think, okay, but you changed to something else than what we thought, but we didn't want to change. We're not trying to change token economics to please a particular set of stakeholders. We're trying to change the design, to make a better design for the overall ecosystem, which includes all participants. And I think this is important to keep in mind because the exercise by questioning and doing a survey on staking business was to understand their behavior more than anything. So it was a bit of a long answer, but I think I wanted to include the context so that nobody feels that we asked somebody but not somebody else. I think that's important. Yes.
Yes.
What else do we have?
Thank you for the answer. You've actually answered the next question at the same time. It was, why not take into account all ecosystem participants?
Okay, yeah, I think we covered that too. Okay, great. Then let's take the next one as well.
Okay.
Let's see.
Do you see the recent foundation validator unstaking action of 1 billion CCD as part of the tokenomics update?
Oh yes. Okay. So this is the question we got, and it was actually myself who said let's keep this for this AMA because I think it's not an easy yes or no question. It requires some nuance. For a token economic design of a blockchain, there's no relation. We have a blockchain, it has some parameters, it has some design mechanisms, and if a particular actor in the ecosystem does a particular action with his or her tokens, this is of course nothing to do with the overall design. With that being said, the foundation is a special actor in this ecosystem, is the special actor in the ecosystem. It does not do things purely out of economic incentives because its incentive by law, by Swiss law, is to facilitate the growth of the ecosystem as a whole. It does also have a lot of tokens, and 1 billion tokens is a lot compared to the total amount of tokens. So you could say that the connection is that a particular action of a large token holder does affect token movements, so to speak. Of course, it affects if when the foundation unstakes 1 billion tokens, it means that there are less staking participants on the market, which means that there are more rewards for the participants who are left, which means that there are less overall security because there's now 1 billion tokens less in staking, locked for staking. So of course it has an indirect effect, but for this exercise, which is a long-term planning of the token economics design of the Concordium blockchain, I don't think it can be put into a great weight whether a particular actor decides to stake or unstake a particular set of amount of tokens. Yeah, so the answer is yes and no. Yes on one hand, no on another hand. Perhaps this is not satisfactory, but it's just me trying to elaborate on why I can understand why one would see this as a big change in the token economics, but essentially it does not change anything regarding to the overall design. Yeah, I think that was enough of an answer.
Yeah, we have like 15 questions left on the list in about 15 minutes. So
yeah, okay, great.
Stick to 1 minute per question. We'll cover them all.
I will try to limit my future answers a bit.
Next one. I've seen a semantic discussion unfold regarding tokenomics redesign and tokenomics. Were there topics that were no-go?
Yeah, okay, that's also a little bit in extension of the answer we just had here. I think there's no topics on token economics that are no-goes. I mean, we did say we will consider all options. We will consider every single variable there is. But some topics, and especially regarding to the Concordium Foundation's policy of its tokens, there's also a transparency report. The first transparency report was released in the summer, and the next one is scheduled here in the winter. And the transparency report also talks about how the foundation uses and allocates its tokens, how it gives out grants, etc. So all topics that is a part of how the foundation uses its tokens, I won't call them a no-go because we did talk about them. We just figured out that this is not part of a long-term change of the token design of the blockchain. But instead, this is something that should be addressed in the transparency report, or at least in the talk in regards to that when we come to that. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, next question. What is now exactly needed to lower inflation?
Okay, so by inflation, I assume it means what do we need to do in order to lower the mint rate again or further. I think it's a clearly stated goal for Concordium. It has been so since the inception of the blockchain, and it still is, to reach a long-term mint rate of 2%. Before it was 10, now it's 8. And I think the governance committee has a responsibility of monitoring whether 8% is good enough and whether it fulfills the expectations that we have for the blockchain and the ecosystem. And it will also be the task and the obligation of the governance committee to propose a future decrease and to put it into effect through a majority vote. And in parallel to this, we also have the decentralization of the governance committee. So my expectation is also that the token holders through on-chain voting will be able to decide on governance members who will be able to propose and make decisions on the mint rate. Yes? So,
okay, thank you. I would like to do a few more questions.
Yeah, let's do a few more. Let's keep them short. Could you tell us why a fixed supply wasn't considered for this token economics update?
A fixed supply, it was actually considered, and it is still being considered. It hasn't been put on the table yet because currently we are lowering, well, the mint rate from 10 to 8%. Limiting the supply, when you look at other chains doing it, it's something far off in the future, 20 years, 100 years. And it seems a bit premature to decide now that at some point in the far future, we suddenly don't want to mint any more coins. We are gradually making our way down to the 2%, which is what has been decided as long-term goal by the foundation. And when we get there, the foundation might decide, or the governance committee, the token holders will have decentralized quite a lot by then. So there might be a decision to go down further, and we might reduce it to 1%, 0.5%, and then eventually 0. And there's no excluding that we get there, but it just seems completely premature right now to take a decision for the long-term future when we have no idea what awaits us in the next 5 years. But it is definitely being discussed.
Okay, that's good to hear, and maybe to continue down that road. We didn't hear about, we didn't get answers about token allocation, spending on the foundation, creation of utility, democratic governance. Why was these topics not addressed? Or I think we've addressed some of them during this Q&A, but perhaps you can elaborate a little bit here on this.
Well, we'll just pick each one individually. I'm not sure what is meant by token allocation, but that sounds like the kind of thing which would be in a transparency report, wasn't part of our tokenomics redesign. Spending of the foundation, again, hopefully transparency report. We have no control over that. How will utility be created? Well, the commercial team is working as much as possible on getting new use cases which create utility, and we're trying to provide tools for our use cases. Nothing to do with tokenomics. Democratic governance, we have our roadmap for decentralization. It's in the white paper. We believe we can stick to it. No reason not to. It's coming. I guess that wraps it up.
Okay, I think, yeah, so I think just to the user who posed this question, if there's anything else, dear user, that who asked this question, is there anything else you want to have an answer on, please, in the follow-up to this AMA, please ask us, and I mean, and we'll do the best we can to answer it. But we also must say that there have been a lot of questions which is not directly related to token economics that has been put forward, but we're doing our best to address them as well. There's also a question regarding the transaction fee. Is this fee then actually is this competitive enough for high throughput industries? I think this has been a key point in Concordium, and yeah.
Yeah, the answer is no. We believe at the moment that it needs to go down, and that's why we're looking at it. And there will be a reduction. As I said before, it is hard to decide exactly how much, because when you compare to other chains, their prices are volatile. If the next bull run, prices on all other chains might go up by 20, and ours will stay stable. But it's something we're looking at, and it is going to change.
So we could fairly assume that the new transaction fee scheme is going to take into consideration high throughput industries.
Yes, we're looking at it. I mean, every transaction is different. If you look at DEXs, or we look at minting NFTs, if you look, the prices change a lot from one chain to the other. Sometimes they are similar prices, sometimes they're very different, so it makes the whole thing extremely complex. But we want to make sure that all industries can set up business on Concordium. So we'll try and have adapted prices for all types of transactions.
Okay. I think we can make just one or two more questions. So let me just skip a little bit here and go to, I think this is a really good question. Why are existing bakers with less than 500,000 CCD to be continuing to run their nodes as validators? Wouldn't it be better to give them a grace period to increase the stake? And if not, then remove them. Makes it fair. What do you think, Christopher?
We could have done that. It's hard to decide what is fair. These are people that have been around, they set up their nodes. So we are introducing measures to remove inactive validators. I think that's really important. So we will not have, as soon as that is done, we will not have any people with 14,000 K that are not running a proper node. They have to run a proper node, otherwise they don't stay. So I think that is an important measure. But when someone has opened a node with the minimum requirement, when it was the minimum requirement, and they've been running a good node ever since, we don't want to kick them out. They don't harm our chain in any way. They contribute positively. So the decision right now is they keep them. What they can't do is change their CCD. They can't go, oh, well, I have 14,000 now, I want to have 20,000. They'll actually get an error message saying, sorry, 20,000 is not allowed. So they're going to have problems each time they want to change it, because technically what happens is each time they want to move the stake, they get that we check, is it 500,000? So that's when the check happens. So if they want to increase it or decrease it a bit, that won't work. But we don't want to remove people who have perfectly functioning nodes and contribute to the whole network.
Okay, great, Christopher. I have one last question for you. The few changes are punitive for both validators and delegators. How can this actually lead to more decentralization and secure the network, basically?
Right. So we have tried not to add anything which is punitive for people that run good nodes, honestly. So these won't get kicked out. We're only going to remove validators that perform poorly. It isn't quite clear what this question refers to, which measures. So for example, the cooldown has increased, but I mean, for delegators, 2 weeks to 3 weeks I don't see it as really punitive. And as we said, these are done for security measures. It should be the same for delegators and validators. I guess the one which could affect people the most is not getting rewards when stake is in cooldown. And that is true. You're going to lose a little bit of rewards. But how often do you have stake in cooldown? It is something which is rather rare, and you've received rewards, or the validators have received rewards the whole time while they were up and running. If you calculate the percentage over a year, we're looking at something very small. And it is really important for the security that stake in cooldown does not count, because this opens a door to an attack where you attack just before you get your stake back in the wallet. So we consider the effect on validators and delegators to be quite small, and the effect on security to be quite huge. As Mikael mentioned, some other point, it's really a balance of everything. And when something was really important for one case, for example, security, we did it even if it had a small inconvenience for others. But we're just trying to balance things out as best as we can.
Okay. I think that's a very good and sufficient answer. So thanks a lot, Christopher. I think that was all we could get to do here in this AMA session. I hope that I can ask you to join me in potentially answering other questions on social media afterwards, if we get follow-up questions for this, or also for those questions that we didn't get to answer.
Yes, definitely. The ones we haven't answered now, we will answer in the social media.
Okay, then thank you a lot, Christopher, for joining today, and it was a pleasure to go through all the different token economics changes that we have done. So appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thank you for listening in today on the Concordium Token Economics AMA. We got a lot of questions, and we tried to answer them as best as possible. Potentially all the questions and all the talk that Christopher and I had today, potentially that have led to new questions. You are always more than welcome to put them forward to our community managers in our community channels as comments on this video, and we will do our best to elaborate and respond to the questions, and also to engage in a dialogue, because a lot of these things leads to new questions, which leads to new answers, and this is all a part of making sure that we are all on the same page on the token economics, which is a huge important part of the blockchain design as an overall. So thank you very much for joining in today, and I hope that it was worthwhile to follow all the things we've been done on token economics. So thank you.